All right, so when do you actually pay interest in a margin account with Questrade? I get the question asked a lot. When do you actually pay interest? What type of trades will actually make you pay interest in a margin account? So the first thing you should know is if your cash line, if this cash line over here, if it is below zero, if it is negative, then you're paying interest on that negative balance. So we need to see what would make your cash balance negative. So you probably see a negative here in market value, but that doesn't mean that I'm paying interest. That's just my market value. That's the equities that I'm holding, the positions that I'm holding. And since most of my trades in my margin account is selling options, they have a negative market value. For example, if I go to my positions and I add the column market value right now I don't have market value added as a column. So I'm just going to add it so you could see what it looks like. So if I click this button over here to choose the columns that I can add, there you go. You got market value. So I'm going to close X. I'm going to click X here, sorry. So you can see market value for Corsair, for example. This is a naked put. Now the price right now of that put option, I sold it for $4, but the price right now is $4.31. I did one contract, so that's times 100. So the market value of this option here, this put option, is negative 431. So that adds up. So that what comes over here, that's what you see here, negative 2,861 US. That comes from all my positions, the value of my positions, and basically the value of this put option is 431, but it doesn't mean that I'm down $431 because I collected $4. Right now I'm currently down $31, but it's an unrealized loss. But the market value, which is basically the price of what you're holding, in this case for this short put option, is negative 431. So that's why I've got a negative over here, because if you look at all my positions, if I group by position, and let's say I sort by market value, you can see I've got negative 1945, negative 1178. So I've got so many negatives, and then I've got a few positives because they're part of the put spread, right? So if it's a put spread, one of the leg is short and one of the leg is long. So that's why this one has a positive market value. But I've got more short market value, more negative market value, because some of my trades are naked puts. So you can see Adobe Baba is a put spread, but Corsair, Fubo, Laser, LGVW, Open, Peloton, they're all short puts, so they have a negative market value. So all this to say that the market value is not what decides if you pay interest or not. So don't get distracted by that. You've got to look at the cash line, and you've got to look at the individual columns, because if you've got let's say you've got 10,000 Canadian, but you've got a negative US cash balance, then you're paying interest on that US balance, because in a margin account, Questrade does not convert the Canadian funds to US automatically. So you have to make sure that both columns here are above zero, not the combined columns. So don't look at the combined columns. Look at the individual columns and make sure that the cash line is above zero. That's how you make sure that you're not paying interest. I'm going to give an example of some trades and tell you which line is impacted when you place that trade. So for example, if I buy shares, let's say I buy $1,000 worth of shares. In my margin account, that $1,000 is going to impact my cash, because I'm going to have to spend $1,000 to buy that stock. So my cash line would be $9,800 minus $1,000. Now my maintenance excess, if I'm buying a stock that has a 30% margin requirement, my maintenance excess will decrease by about $300, 30% of that. So my maintenance excess is sort of like my financial health, my status. My maintenance excess needs to stay above zero so that I don't get a margin call. But that's a different story. That doesn't have to do with interest. That has to do with my actual buying power. I need to stay above zero for my maintenance excess, or else I get a margin call and I either have to deposit more money or the broker will start liquidating my positions. Okay, but we're talking about interest in this video. Cash line needs to be above zero. So if I'm buying $1,000 worth of shares, my cash line is going to drop by $1,000. So if you only have $1,000 in your cash in your cash line, and you're going to spend $2,000 to buy shares, then you're going to fall to below zero. You're going to have a negative balance of $1,000. So that means you're going to be paying interest on $1,000, even if you have the buying power for $3,000 or $4,000. So even if you have the maintenance excess or the buying power on this line here, even if your buying power allows you to buy more than what your cash line is, as long as your cash line is below zero, you're going to be paying interest. And for day traders, if you buy and sell during the day, but you close your position before close, and at close, your cash line is above zero, you're not going to be paying interest. So during the day, your cash line can drop below zero, but as long as at the end of the day, you're above zero, you're not going to pay interest. All right, so that's the example of buying shares. What about buying options? What if I want to buy a call option? So if, let's say I want to spend $1,000 on a call option. Once again, it's going to come out of my cash. So I'm going to have a negative $1,000. If I'm buying a call option in US, it's going to come out of my cash, US cash line. If I'm buying a Canadian option, it's going to come out of my cash balance. So let's say I've got 9,800 US, but I've got zero cash, and I decide to buy a call option in Canadian. I'm going to have 9,800 US cash, and then I'm going to have negative 1,000 Canadian. So I'm going to be paying interest on the Canadian side. So I need to convert from US to Canadian if I want to make sure that I don't want to pay any interest. So if I buy a call option and spend 1,000, it's going to come out of my cash, which makes sense because someone has to pay for that $1,000. So it comes out of my cash, but it also, my maintenance excess drops by $1,000. In the example of shares, my maintenance excess, if I'm buying a 30% margin requirement stock, my maintenance excess drops by $300. But in the case of buying a call option or buying any option, my maintenance excess, you can't borrow against options, so there's no margin requirement. If you're spending $1,000, it's going to come out of your maintenance excess as well. So minus 1,000 in your cash and minus 1,000 in your maintenance excess as well. Now, let's say you wanted to sell options. So let's say you want to sell a put, a cash secured put. So the impact or the transaction of a cash secured put is you're collecting credit, money comes in. So in this case, your cash line does not fall when you sell an option because you're collecting money. Your cash line actually goes up when you sell an option. Your maintenance excess will drop because it takes some capital to place that trade to sell the option. There's capital requirement to sell options. So your maintenance excess is sort of your buying power in this case to determine if you're able to sell that option or not. Once you sell the option, you're collecting credit, so your cash line goes up. So by selling options, you don't pay interest because you're collecting credit. But let's say you sold an option for $4. So for example, I've got a put option here on Corsair. I sold it for $4. But let's say the stock drops and I decide to buy it back and close the trade, and put option is worth more now. Let's say it's worth, $10. So I sold for $4, I have to buy back for $10. So that means I'm going to end up with a negative $600. Assuming my balance was zero to start with, to begin with, my balance was zero. I sold a put option for $4. My cash balance is now $400. If I buy it back for $10, which is times 100 is $1,000, then my 400 minus 1,000 gives me negative 600. So in that case, I'm gonna have a negative balance of $600, and that's where I'll start paying interest on it. But by closing the position, my option that I sold, my maintenance excess will go back up because I'm no longer in the trade. I closed the trade. So it's important to understand which line is impacted based on the trade that you make. So in the example of a covered call, for example, in a covered call, you're buying 100 shares and then you're selling a call option at the same time. But it's still money coming out. Sometimes it's a smaller amount than if you were buying shares without selling the call option. So let's say I'm buying a stock that cost $30 and I'm selling a call option at $30, collecting $2. So if I were just buying the shares, I would have to spend 100 times 30, which is $3,000. But if I'm collecting $2, so that I'm actually collecting $200 times 100 contracts, times 100 shares. So 3,000 minus 200 will be 2,800. So in this case, in the case of that covered call scenario that I just gave, your cash line would drop by $2,800 because that's the amount of money that's coming out of my account to get into the trade. 3,000 comes out, 200 comes in from selling the call option. So net impact is a debit of $2,800 on my cash line. Now on your maintenance excess, well, that'll depend. The share, buying the shares itself has its own calculation. If it's a 30% margin requirement, then 30% of the price of the stock is what your maintenance excess gonna drop by. So 30% of 3,000, which is $900. So your maintenance excess would drop by about $900 in this case, but your cash line would drop by $2,800. So if we look at the different option strategies, so calls and puts, if you're buying calls and puts, it's a debit to your cash line. If you're selling them, it's a credit to your cash line, but obviously it's a debit to your maintenance excess while the trade is open. If you do a put spread, if it's a debit spread, then it's going to be a debit to your cash, but it's also a debit to your maintenance excess. If you're selling a vertical, so if you're selling a credit spread, it's going to be a credit to your cash. So money comes in, gets deposited to your cash, but obviously your maintenance excess drops by the width of your spread minus the credit that you received. So same thing, calendar, if it's a long calendar or a short calendar. If it's a net debit, if you started the trade with a net debit, then money comes out of your cash line. If you started the trade with a net credit, your cash actually goes up, but the trade is still open. You still have to close the trade. So depending on if the trade is profitable or not, it might have a different impact on your cash line. Same thing for diagonal. It could be a long diagonal, like a poor man's covered call, or it could be a short diagonal. So if it's a net, if you enter the trade with a net debit, then your cash line gets impacted. If you enter the trade with a net credit, then your cash line goes up. A straddle, same thing. You could have a long straddle, you could have a short straddle. So if it's a long straddle, that's actually going to have probably the biggest impact, because usually straddle is the option strategy which is the most expensive option strategy, because you're buying or selling the at the money option. So yeah, so if you're buying a straddle, it's a long straddle, then your cash line is going to drop. If you're selling a straddle, then your cash line is going to increase until you actually close the trade. Strangle, same thing. You could have a short strangle, you can have a long strangle. Covered call will usually be it's always going to be a debit, because you're buying shares and selling a call against it. So it's always going to be a debit for covered call. Married put, while you're buying 100 shares and you're buying a put as well. So this one's a debit for sure to your cash line. So it decreases your cash line. And all the others, well, it depends. You could either enter them in as long, or you could enter the trade as short. So if it's long, cash line goes down. If it's a short trade, cash line goes up because you're collecting credit. But once again, you still have to close the trade. So it depends if you end up closing it for more than you sold or less than you sold. So how much does Questrade charge for interest? So go to Questrade's website, pricing, self-directed investing pricing. Go to margin trading, see margin pricing. If you reach this guy, you're at the right place. And then see these three tabs here, click on interest. So here it is. So for Canadian, if you've got a negative Canadian balance, it's a lower interest rate. If it's a US negative balance, it's a higher interest rate. So for Canadian, it's 2.45 plus 3.5. That's if you have a negative Canadian cash balance. So all Canadian non-registered accounts. For US negative cash balance, it's going to be 3.25 plus 3.75. So US right now is exactly 7% per year. Canadian is about almost 6%. So 2 plus 5, yeah. So 6% per year for Canadian and 7% for US negative cash balance. So that's the interest rate per year. It gets charged to your account. It's a debit to your account every month, I think 15th of the month, but it's accrued every day. So every day you have a negative balance, a negative cash balance, it counts, but you only pay for it once a month. And the rate is 6% per year for Canadian cash balance and 7% per year for American cash balance. All right, so if you have any questions, leave in the comment section below. Like always, if you can open an account with Questrade to trade on the stock market, use my referral link below to get $50 in free trades. Also, check out the other referral links below. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button, share with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.